Hi, I'm Jerry. I was born in 1938 in Tippecanoe, which is the south side of Milwaukee. My mother, when she came to this country, and I don't know a lot about it, but when she came to this country, they moved, her and her mother moved to the Dakotas. And my mother's playmates at that time were Indians. That's what they were, Indians. Mm-hmm. Anyway, she grew up a little bit, and one day a guy came through, and he had some kind of thing in Appleton. And I don't know if it was a used car place or, anyway, he talked to my mother's mother and said, I'd like to get to know her a little bit. So they did, and it ended up, they got married. And she had two boys. One was Edward, he was younger, and the older one was, come on, Jerry, I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, he kind of went with his father in this Appleton area and ended up in Michigan. Edward stayed with Mom. She was the oldest, he was the oldest one. And then the rest of the family was, where everybody had a name and a nickname. Russell was Russie. Edward was Eddie. Richard was Dickie. Robert was Bobby. The only one that wasn't was Gerald. And that was it, and it stayed that way. I can remember at one point when we first went to Waupaca, some of my friends would call, can I talk to Jerry? And my father would say, you must have the wrong number, and hang up the phone. He did not recognize Jerry. It was Gerald.
Gerald or nothing.
That's it. And I was the only one that didn't have a shorter name, you know.
No nickname.
Yeah.
What was Dorothy's? Did she have a?
No, she was Dorothy.
Just Dorothy.
But the older sister was Winifred, and everybody called her Tootsie. Tootsie, Dorothy, and then down the line, Leonard was Lenny, all except me. Well, I was probably a lot different than some of the friends I had, because I did do work. We lived in Waupaca at the time, and I used to pick potatoes from a guy that had a huge potato plant. And in wintertime, I would set pins at the bowling alley for some money. So I was about the only kid of my friends that I chummed with who had any money. Well, my high school years at Boys Tech were excellent, and I missed it when I went up. When we moved to Waupaca, they said my marks were good enough I could skip a half a year or half a grade and just take my senior year, but I didn't know any seniors. All the kids I chummed with and everything were juniors. So that's why I said, no, I'll take a half year over again, which worked out good for me because I knew a lot about half of my junior year. And eventually I graduated from Waupaca High School. A gal I was riding to school with, when we picked her up, I noticed there was a blue Ford car parked there, and I said, what's that? She says, oh, my dad's working on that. He does that, works on cars and things. And I said, boy, why don't you ask him how much it's worth? She came back the next day and said, my dad thinks I can get a couple $100 for it. I said, okay, I'll see what I can do about getting some money from my mother and father. Well, when I broached that subject, it didn't go over too good. So she says, no, we're not buying you a car. I said, oh, okay. You want a car? She says, go to the bank and make a loan, which I did. But I ended up with a 1949 Ford V8 car, which was excellent.
How much was your loan?
Pardon?
How much was the loan?
$200.
$200 loan. Nice.
But I paid that off pretty quickly, doing what I said before. Picking potatoes during the season, setting pins in the bowling alley.
So they didn't have a machine?
No,
Just
at
had to
that
do it
time,
by
there were
hand?
no. You set them up by hand in there in a rack and then pull the rack down. So anyway, I went past my parents and sisters and brothers, and I went to Boys Tech. And I took up electricity. And I went to freshman, sophomore, junior. And part of my junior year, we moved to Waupaca. So I had to finish school up there. And of course, that's when I got the car and everything. To be honest with you, I do not believe that I was into too much of anything at the time. Later on, as I got older, that changed. But at that point, we could go to a place called the Casino. It was right on a chain of lakes. And they had music played, and once in a while we would get a group, 2-3 people would sing or whatever. But it was a fun place to be. And they only served beer there, but at one point I was too young for it. But later on I heard that you could get cocktails there too. But it was a fun place for meeting. And I met a lot of people there too. A bunch of them from Stevens Point used to come down for that. And I met a lot of good guys, friends from Stevens Point at the time.
What was the drinking age then?
18.
18 then?
And I was, I lied a little bit and got around it pretty good. Well, when I graduated from high school, I had taken some Boys Tech, and I thought, I'd like to do something like that. And my Dorothy was going with a fellow by the name of Harry Jedlicka when they got married a short time after that. But he was a tool and die maker, and he knew a lot of the machine shops that are around, and he said he could get me a job in one of the machine shops. So I went down and I talked to the owner and everything about the machine shop, and he says, come on to work. So I came to work, and I worked on different things in a machine shop. And at that point, my mother and father were living in Waupaca, and I went up, and a good friend of mine at the time, Ray Wash, his dad ran a filling station in Waupaca. His mother ran a little diner where you could get sandwiches next door. And I told him, and well, Ray said, he says, how's your job working out? And I said, it's a job. What am I going to say? He says, go down and talk to my dad. So the next time I was in there, I went over and talked to his father. And he said, we have an electrical outfit here in Waupaca, he says, and they all come down here and fill their cars up. And they're asking me if I knew anybody who was interested in becoming an apprentice or working in the electrical trade. And he says, I thought of you right away. So this is who you should go and see. And he told me who I was supposed to go and see. And he said, would you be interested in that? And I said, yeah. He says, it'll be an apprenticeship. I said, that's fine with me, because that's what I wanted anyway. Mm-hmm. And so I started working out of his shop with some of the guys. And Bill Cook and his wife Lita he worked for Uptown Electric. And a couple of the guys loved to work with me because I could do things that they couldn't. Mm-hmm. I knew how to read blueprints, bend pipe, pull wire, make connections. And some of them didn't, they were a little bit leery about it. So they all wanted me to work with them in places. But Uptown at that point at one time said, Jerry, this is after I had my car. He says, can you go down to Chicago and work for a couple of weeks? We got 2 jobs down there that we got to get going, and you can help. And I said, okay. So I went to Chicago, and they were doing 2 jobs, 2 different schools north of where I stayed. Then they sent me to Dubuque, Iowa. And Dubuque was nice, but Chicago had a place right in down in the basement where I could stay. It had sleeping quarters, bathroom, shower, everything. And the one in Dubuque did not have that, so I had to rent something when I worked up there. Mm-hmm. And so I did that. I worked back and forth for quite a while. At one point, we met some other electricians, and I was talking to them, and they said, you got to join the union. So I asked around and everything, and went to a couple meetings, and everybody wanted to know who I was, of course, and everything. And when I told them, they said, oh, okay. So I became an apprentice.
So what was the union?
International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW.
Okay.
Which I stayed in a long time with. Well, at one point, Modern Equipment Company in Port Washington was going to put in Saginaw, Michigan, they were putting up 3 separate cupolas for melting iron. And it was a special iron, they called it NIF, which is nodular iron. And they used nodular iron on the axis of the drive shaft where all of the pistons work off. And that was, they wanted it because it was a very hard iron. And that's what they wanted for their cars. So anyway, one of the guys came up and said, Jerry, instead of working as an electrician, why don't you come to work for us? And I thought, what? So they talked me into it, and then I went up and I talked to Port Washington. I talked to one of the Espin brothers and told him what was going on and everything. And he said, boy, he says, we'd sure like you to come to work for us because you know a lot about cupolas and electrical, and we're putting in an electric furnace in Saginaw. And he said, we want somebody that'll stand by in case they have a problem with stuff. And I think it was in Dubuque, Iowa, where I had met some high voltage electricians, and they showed me how they can make pots and stuff like this. And so I had a little background in high voltage, and that's what they were feeding this thing with, was high voltage. So I had a crew that all they had to do was call me, and we would all get down there and do something if something went wrong. So that's how I started out with Modern Equipment Company. And they wanted me to go to work for them, and I said, okay, well, what am I going to do? Well, we want you to do a little estimating. So when I started with Modern, I estimated some of the jobs that they would go out and they'd hire a electrical group, and they'd have an idea what was reasonable for them to hire. Well, anyway, I did that. They said, you're a pretty sharp cookie. He said, they wanted me to meet some of their area representatives, and they had 3 different spots for area representatives. I met all 3, went to 3 places, and they would take me to a foundry where they had one of our Moderns. And I'd say, well, you know, we got better stuff now. You can put this on the lines, or you can do this and that. And ended up, they were very happy with me because I did sell, per se, a lot of equipment for them.
Right.
So.
How long were you there?
Ooh, quite a while. Quite a while. But I had an electrical background, and it worked out for me. So. I did that because Modern Equipment Company wanted me to go and meet their area representatives in 3 different locations. Well, there were a lot of places I couldn't drive to, so I started flying. And at that time, I was trap shooting. That's another thing I did, is I used to set traps in Waupaca. Bought a shotgun, had it, and I was a pretty good shot. I had a lot of trophies from different things. So I used to bring my shotgun in a bag with 2 full cartons of shells. I'd bring that right on the plane. And all I had to do was walk on, and they'd take my gun and put it in the cockpit where the pilots were. And that was it.
Did they have metal detectors at the airport back then?
Not that I could remember that.
So you just walk into the airport with a shotgun in a case? And,
In a case, right. And I could walk in, it didn't bother anymore. Later on in life, I wasn't doing that, but I was flying a lot at that time, flying all over the place. Anyway, I got so I could get on this was when I was working for Modern Equipment Company, and get on a plane with 2-3 guys. And I'd get on a plane and I'd have a sport jacket on, tie, everything. That's how you traveled at that point, and which was new to me at that time too.
was everybody dressed up?
Most of them were dressed very nicely. Not all had suits and whatever, but very nicely dressed.
It was kind of expected.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I'd get on a plane, sit down in a seat, and I had a little thing that said, "To ET and water, 2 early times in water." I'd put that on and fall asleep. When I woke up, I had 2 drinks and it was sitting in the front of me. So, and they always said, Modern said, "You do not fly first class." So I got around that by getting to know, when I was in Saginaw, getting to know the gal who'd make up the appointments for flights out, in and out.
Right.
And I told her, I said, "We're not supposed to fly first class." So I said, "How can we work around it?" She says, "I'll just wait. I'll hold 3 or 4 seats, whatever you want. I'll hold those, sell out the rest of it, and just tell them that this is the only 4 seats we had left, and they were in first class." So,
Oops, oh.
and then my boss ended up, he knew what we were doing, but he didn't say anything. So it worked out fine.
What a shame that all the regular seats are still out.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
That's right.
Anyway, they wanted me to do some high voltage work. I went in there, high voltage work. And this was at the Miller Brewing Company. And one of the guys came over and talked to me, and he said, "Would you be interested in coming to work at Miller?" I said, "Oh, yeah." So I went in and talked to a couple of electricians and everything. They said, "Nah, it's perfect, nice place to work." So I went to Miller Brewing Company. And I had a pretty good job. A lot of the engineers, we had a corporate part of it building there. And if they hired anybody, they'd hire an electrical engineer maybe, which is fine. But they'd come in to our shop. And we had a shop at each building that was around. It was a shop, you had a refrigerator full of beer and everything. And it was kind of nice. A couple of them were just, you would not believe that they'd come in and they'd say, "Who's Jerry?" And I'd say, "I am." And he said, "I'm supposed to work with you today and tomorrow, follow you around, and so I can learn how things are in the brewery." I said, "Okay." And he says, "What are we going to do first?" I said, "Let's go get a beer." What? Their mouth would open up like, "What do you want?" But we could drink whenever we wanted to. Didn't bother you. You had 3 chances to go. If you got drunk the first time, it was kind of forgiven. Second time, nope, no more. And if they caught you with it, out you went. So you had 3 shots at. But every in our little electric shop, we had a big refrigerator just full of beer all the time. We used to go down where it was fermenting, and we knew how to get the good stuff out before it got cut back and everything.
Did anybody ever get drunk and cause trouble on the?
Oh yeah, there were 2 people I knew. One was a fitter, and one was a machinist, and they both got canned. I watched it. I didn't, We had one guy. We were all trying to get him to drink beer. He came, park his car in a parking lot, get out of the car, and he had a cup of coffee. He went in and he'd brew a big pot of coffee. He drank coffee all day long. When he went to his car to go home, he had a full cup of coffee. He's one of the guys I went to Vegas with. His wife had MS, and she was in a wheelchair. And we knew we were both going to Vegas, but we didn't realize we had the same planes and everything. Anyway, we met him at the getting ready to board the plane. All right, well, he went first because his wife was in a wheelchair. So he went on, and when it became my turn, I went on. I had 2 other guys with me, and got on the plane, and the stewardess came over, and she says, "You're Jerry, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." She says, "I've been told by someone about you." And I said, "Why? What did I do?" She says, "We heard that you like to go into the men's room and smoke a cigarette." And I said, "Oh, okay. I know who told you that. The gal in a wheelchair, right?" I shouldn't say," she said. I said, "I know who it is." I said, "You know, she dances with 3 other girls," I said, "once a week or 2 times a week at this place or that place and everything." She looked at me like, "What?" And I said, "Oh, it is bullshit about they use this wheelchair every time they want to get on a plane and get real good seats." So I got back at her. We had a good time together, though. I enjoyed the hell out of Miller Brewing Company, though. I said, they treated us really good. The guy that actually hired me or convinced, he talked to me and he says, "Come to work for us." I said, "Well, okay." So he says, "You got to go down, fill out an application." And I filled out the application, and she said, "We have no record of that. There's no record of it that you graduated from high school and everything." And I had to bring in papers with it. Showed her the papers, and she says, "We'll get back at you." She never got back at me. Finally, one day, he said, I came into work, and he said, "Have you talked to?" He said, "No." "Okay, let's go." He put on a jacket. "Get your jacket," he said. Put on a jacket. We walked over and he walked in there, and it was a gal. He said, "This is Jerry Marciniak, and if you don't put him on a goddamn payroll today, you have a good chance of losing your job." "Oh, that won't happen," she said. So I got hired.
That's one way to do it.
Yeah. I was well liked. There were a lot of people working in the brewery, different places, and I worked in just about all of them at one time or another. Right. And I remember one day, there was one gal, I was in South Packaging, and they were running, the machines were running, beer was going out, being put in cartons and everything. And she said, "Jerry." And I turned around and looked, and she says, "Come here." So I walked over, and she said, "Are you guys still carpooling?" And she says, "I want you to tell you something." She says, "Be careful when you leave Ozaki County and come into Milwaukee." She says, "They're looking for people like you. They like to slam into your car. You're going to get out. Somebody's going to open up one of the other doors and take everything out of it." She says, "Watch them." She says, they're terrible out there doing that stuff, you know." And she said, "The cops aren't stopping enough of them. They're still doing it." So, and I thought, wow. My advice for young people is use common sense. I'm sick and tired of picking up or watching on TV about a couple, their 3-year-old drowned because they weren't watching them going into tipped into the swimming pool, or walked down the sidewalk and out into the street, or walked over into the woods and didn't know how to come back out. Use common sense. I see so much of it now. No one uses common sense, it seems. And that's one thing I would like to tell everybody. Not really that I can think of. I pride myself with the fact that I could do a lot of things a lot of my friends didn't know how to do. And that's a little carpentry here, or to put in a panel here or something like this, you know. They didn't have the wherewithal that I had, and I just picked it up, I guess. I don't know. No one really went out of their way to tell me or teach me anything, but I picked it up myself. Now, I went to work for Modern Equipment Company, And the gal that operated the telephone liked me. She wanted me to date her pretty hard. Anyway, I just didn't. Anyway, she knew another gal that was a roommate of your mother's when you were in Milwaukee working. And she said, "You don't like this other gal." I knew she came in quite a few times when Black Hat was there. A lot of people went down there. Anyway, I made a point of going over and talking to her. We had no problems. She found out I was divorced, and we didn't get into any of that, but I asked her out. She went out with me, and we got along fine. I was living with Roger Walk at the time. She'd come over. She'd cook us some supper for both of us and stuff like that, you know. Mm-hmm. We got along fine, and decided to ask her if she wanted to get married. And she said, sure. One of my buddies, Jerry Smith, was going with a girl, Mona, and she was working in Appleton with a gal, and her name was Shirley Dingledine. She lived in Navarino, and I ended up meeting her. We talked, and we got along real good, and everything, and we got married. We had 2 kids, but that didn't last too long. We were living in Wapak, I think, at the time, and one day I walked in, and her dad was sitting at the table. And he said, I have to talk to you. And I said, well, about what? He says, Shirley wants a divorce. So, kind of short, but I don't know what the hell to tell you. If she wants a divorce, what am I going to say? No. So, we were divorced.
It just kind of came as a surprise?
Sort of. But the problem, she had an aunt that went with a guy. They had kids and everything, and she made up her mind she was going to get a divorce, and she took him for just about all of his money. And I think Shirley heard about that and thought, Jerry's got quite a bit of money. I'm going to get it. She didn't get it. She got some, but she didn't get it all. And that's what she wanted.
I see.
That was it. This gal in Michigan, she said to somebody that she wanted to talk to me. And I said, you want to talk to me? She says, yeah. She says, Johnny Cash is coming to Detroit and coming up. He was supposed to do it last year. He stopped in Detroit. That was a year before that. He stopped in Detroit and he did a show. And when he left the show, he got arrested for having drugs. Anyway, they threw him in jail and he got out short time after that. But all of there are 3 places he was going to were canceled. So he was going to make that trip again and make those places. And she says, I can't get tickets. I said, what do you mean? She says, they are sold out. I called the electrical contractor who anything I wanted, all I had to do was hint at it and I had it. And I mean, football games, baseball, everything. Anyway, I said, I need 2 tickets to the Johnny Cash show when it comes to Bay City, I believe it was. He said, you got them. We got a bunch of them. You got 2? I said, 2. Okay. So anyway, we went to see Johnny Cash. And we were sitting in about the 3rd row, excellent seats. And Johnny Cash came out, and he had this gal that he married. Her family they did about 3/4 of the first half of this thing. He came out and sang 2 songs or whatever. Anyway, it was intermission. And she says, I got to get an album and get it signed. I said, okay, I'll go get you the album. You get in line, because there was a pile of people. And I went over and I bought an album for her. Came over. She was up about the third or fourth, so I stood with her, and Johnny Cash signed that was in front of her, came to her, and he says, "Hi, what's your name?" And she told him. He said, "How'd you like the first half?" And she said, "Oh, Johnny," she said, "I missed you so much last year," she said. He says, "Yeah, I had some problems there." And he looked at me and he says, what did you think of the first half? And she says, "He's not that interested in country and Western music." And he went, "What?" And he was sitting at a big table, and there was a big table on each side of him. And these people were coming and standing, and he was going like this one, this one, this one, this one, signing stuff. And anyway, he said, "Hold on a minute." He told the other two guys that were sitting there with him. He got up, he walked around the table and a half, came over and he sat down on the table in front of me.
Right.
And he said, "What don't you like about country and Western music?" And I said, "It's not that I dislike it. It's just that I just take it." He says, "You're going to enjoy the second half," he says, "because I'm going to sing this song, that song, and everything." And I said, "Oh, I know that. I've heard that song, before, but I didn't." Anyway, he came down and he sang. First thing he did is he walked out there and he says, "I'm going to sing this song here with this group of the ones he ended up marrying the gal, a young gal." Anyway, he looked at us and he went like that. So she just thought she was in seventh heaven. Oh yeah. He was a nice guy though. He sat there and he talked to me and, "Did you hear this one, this one?" He says, "Did you know that I started out doing this and saying that?" And wow. We had a good time.
So he held up the.
Oh, they were mad. The people behind me, when he came out and sat and started talking to me, they could have killed me because they wanted to get their stuff signed.
I assume the intermission is only so many.
They extended it out a little bit because. But he got everybody that he could. So he came out afterwards and was still signing stuff. So,
Right.
yeah. And at that time, this place across the street took care of veterans. And at that time, when I first went in there were 3 couples staying there, had been in the Civil War.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but that was quite a while ago. But they were elderly, but there were three couples in there at the time in the Civil War. They were vets from the Civil War. Yeah, they must have went in very, very young. Okay, are we about done?
I think so.
Good.
All right, this is Dad intro, take 1.
All right. My first name is Gerald, and I was born in 1938, and I was born in Tippecanoe, which is a south.
You can't be looking at the sheet. Just look into the lens.
Which lens?
This one. Yep. All right. Go ahead.
Now what?
Do your intro.
Again, start. Gerald Marciniak, but I go by Jerry.
Just say, "Hi, my name is Jerry." You don't have to
Hi,
last names.
my name is Jerry.
Wait too long. Okay. Go.
My name is Jerry Marciniak. I was born in 1938.
You don't say Marciniak.
Huh?
Don't say Marciniak. We'll just do first name.
Jerry.
You have to do the whole thing.
Hello, my name is Jerry Marciniak. I was born in Tippecanoe, which is the south side of Milwaukee, and I was born in 1938.
Okay, that was better. Do it one more time. Just your name, just Jerry.
Hi, I'm Jerry. I was born in 1938 in Tippecanoe, which is the south side of Milwaukee.
Okay.